Well, innovations are useless if you do not implement them. And when it comes to practice, it is usually a challenge. You need a more qualified staff, you need different equipment. What can help this process?
One way is to first to allow it to take place in universities. Sometimes universities are limited. It said they should just be teaching the students and producing the research, but not be involved in taking it forward. So first, encouraging them to play that role, and then supporting it through new kinds of teaching and other programs. For example, at Stanford, faculty members have taken the lead in forming programs to teach faculty and students how to take their research ideas and put them into practice, to do first the translational research, and then to have a weekly seminar in which there are speakers from venture capital, from industry, from law firms, to give them some idea of how the commercialization process takes place. Not that they will necessarily do it themselves, but they will know enough to be able to partner with other people to form a firm if they decide to go in that direction. And then when you have these resources, you have to manage them. You have to keep track of who is doing what in your research group. And so the professor becomes an entrepreneur and a manager, even just to do research. And so then it's not such a big step to doing a startup firm. And so when I was interviewing professors of molecular biology in the 1980s who were doing startup firms, they would say to me, you know, in forming this firm, I'm speaking to venture capitalists instead of government funding agencies. I'm recruiting my former students to work in the firm. It doesn't feel that different than what I was doing in the university. In the university, I was actually running a small business in organizing my research group. So I came to think of the academic research groups as quasi-firms. Many of the characteristics of a business firm, except for the profit motive. And so, not such a big leap from the university to business, because some elements of organizing a business is already present in this type of university system.
Well, this reminds me of Steve Jobs and his team.
The collaboration brought together the entrepreneurial and business skills with the engineering and scientific skills. And the business expertise came from a third person. Wozniak, the other Steve, was the engineer. Jobs was the salesman. And the two of them had this idea. They wanted to build this. Well, they could build it, but how to develop a firm to market it. It wasn't until they found the third person, Mark Merkula, an experienced executive from the semiconductor industry who had retired early, and they interested him in the project. He had the credibility with suppliers, with funders. It was the three of them together that made the firm. Entrepreneurship is a collective process. And when it's successful, it's bringing these three elements together. It's really one person who can do it by themselves. But what happens, one person often becomes the public face of the successful firm. So it's sort of a Steve Jobs, and Steve Wozniak, he's still there, but he fades into the background. And Merkula's role, almost forgotten. Although there's now a center for the study of ethics that he's funded at Santa Clara University, but it's not realized that he was a crucial person to the founding and development of Apple.
Which spheres of industry and business are, so to say, the most responsive to innovations?
I think innovation is a potential that resides everywhere. And not only in technology as a source of new firms, but it can be from humanistic knowledge, from literature. For example, I recently did a study of a very small teaching college in the United States, Southern Oregon University. In the 1930s, a drama teacher from that school wanted to start a festival, an arts festival, but he couldn't do it from the university itself. There wasn't enough resources. So he presented it to the town, and they thought it was a good idea, and they helped start it for their annual 4th of July, National Day Festival, and for putting on plays. And that grew into the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and then into a theater cluster. as other theater groups started, and then into a broader cluster as other arts activities took place, and then businesses came following that. Bed and breakfast, hotels, restaurants. And so that over 60 years, the economy of that town was transformed from one based on an extractive economy, logging, and a railroad, which disappeared. All of that old economy disappeared, but now the town has a new base. It's a humanities town, coming from existing classical knowledge. So this potential is everywhere.
Brain drain has been a huge problem in Russia since the perestroika era. Shall we try to bring all those scientists back?
Oh, there are many successful projects. Many countries have faced this issue. I recall meeting a colleague from France 20 years ago as she did a study of French brain drain. French engineers and science who left France and come to the United States. And after doing this study, the French government commissioned her to organize a project to keep in touch with these people, and first of all to find them, and then to start interacting with them. And then over time, they set up arrangements to bring them back to France on a part-time basis. First making visits, and then offering them part-time jobs, and then maybe even later full-time positions. So the important thing is to renew the relationship and then develop it from there. And so it's not necessarily that you even want to have them all come back. It's an advantage to have some abroad, because they can be the connections to new ideas and to people and business opportunities abroad. So ideally, you want to transform that brain drain into a brain gain by inspiring some of them to become what I call dual life.
Double agents.
Sure, you could call it that, where they have one leg abroad and one leg back to their original home. But to reestablish the connection is the important first step.
Let's talk a bit more about science, but from a different perspective. You've published several works dedicated to gender aspects and also predicted sort of a gender revolution in science. So why is it going to happen?
It's going to happen. The prediction is based on the idea that to advance most fully in a knowledge-based society, a country or a region or a city must take advantage of all its human resources. And to leave out women 50 or more % of the human resources and not to use them and to develop their fullest potential is a handicap, an unnecessary handicap. And so the barriers to women's full participation must be reduced and eliminated. And often that's built into scientific systems without thinking. For instance, I'll give an example from my own country, where in the academic system, it's based on a tenure system, where in the first 7 years, you must produce very rapidly a large body of work in order to be offered a permanent position. Well, those 7 years happen to coincide typically with the childbearing years. And so women have to think, well, what is going to be my main priority? If I concentrate fully on running for tenure, well, then I'll have to wait a longer time to have children. And some may make this decision and some not. But that is one level at which some women then drop out. And so you need to rethink the organization of the academic system to reduce the time. And why is it concentrated on the young years? There's a belief that's come to be accepted without empirical basis that it's when you're young that you make your greatest contribution to science. But actually, if you analyze the literature carefully, you find people's publications and whatnot and ideas also come later on. And so it's not true that you have to focus only on youth. You could spread out the time period. And we have good examples of women who came back into science after 10 or even 20 years, pursuing very good careers at a later stage. But those are individual exceptions. So the system needs to be changed to allow entry and re-entry and to reduce to part-time levels not necessarily that accommodate different people's wishes. Some women want to work 2/3 time while they're raising their children. Some want to be full-time with more of a support structure. So the system has to be rethought, not to make it so tied to age, and to provide a support structure so that one can participate.
Well, hopefully we will see it one day. Professor, it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.